Hello, everybody, and welcome to Where Are They Now in Sports. We are here right now at The Shave in Beverly Hills, and today's guest is a legendary sports agent. He represented 60 NFL players who got drafted in the first round. 8 of them were #1 picks. There were names such as Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Ben Roethlisberger, and many more. The movie Jerry Maguire was inspired by his stories. He had money, fame, power, pictures of him in front cover magazines. He had it all. But then he had a bump on the road and things were not going his way. But within the past 4 years, he worked his way being back on top. We are so happy to have Leigh Steinberg. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Where Are They Now in Sports. As you can see, I got the legendary Leigh Steinberg in the house. How are you, Leigh?
I'm great.
I got to shake your hand, man. Being a sports agent, what happens, let's just say, maybe it's me, okay? I won the Heisman last year. I'm entering my junior year in college. When do you have the right to approach the college kid as far as representing him? How does that work?
As soon as a male person leaves his mother's womb, they can start talking to agents. As a matter of fact, if you hang out at obstetrics wards and maternity wards around hospitals, you might see agents looking for healthy babies.
Oh, okay.
So they can talk at any time. There are only 2 limitations. Number 1, they can't accept something of value from an agent or the family, and number 2, they can't sign a contract with an agent. But those discussions could begin anytime.
Let's say I'm the guy. I'll be like, you come up to me, hey, Eddie, I want to represent you. Is that how you approach it?
You probably are going to have a father or family or someone that's in charge of agents. So all the calls will go through them. And certain schools now have compliance, which offers agent days where someone can sit and go through a series of different interviews. But for the player you're describing, he undoubtedly is going to have task someone to be the head of it. And then they probably are going to have an interview process where they might look at 3 or 4 agents, so you need to have materials to submit to them. And then they'll sit and have an interview, and they've probably done due diligence, so they've looked into background, they've looked into character, they've looked into clients, and then they ask a series of very tough questions, and at the same time you're hoping to establish a little bit of rapport. The athlete might be there, he might not be there. If this is occurring prior to the season, then it may just be the father, mother, family attorney, and then there'll be a follow-up after the season's over where you see if there's rapport, and the player himself will get to make the ultimate choice.
Now, when you came out of Berkeley, you actually worked out of your parents' house, right here in West LA?
Yes.
And my question to you is, how many pages are in an NFL contract? Like, I mean, how many pages? Did you actually type that on a typewriter when you were home? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I had a extremely sophisticated office. I was my own secretary. If you called on the phone and I was on the phone, it rang busy. And I would go to Kinko's Copies to Xerox things. That was the first 6 years of my practice. I had the first player in the first round of the draft and other great clients, but that's what I was doing. Standard player contracts are negotiated by the Players Association and the league, and they're a piece of blue-printed paper. Every player has to sign the same one. The only thing that changes are the terms of compensation, how much a player is going to get. So those standard clauses are not something that I can negotiate out.
When you had clients like Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Drew Bledsoe, Roethlisberger, do you have sports agents in your days try to steal clients like that? I mean, do they try, like, let's say their contract expires, they're still 26 years old, they've been in the league for 5 years, well proven, they're legit, no joke. Do they say, hey, you know what, you're expiring next year, come to my agency, forget about Leigh? Has that ever happened to you?
Not more than every day. So there's quite a bit of that. We try to stay away from it because I know how much it would hurt to lose a client, and I don't want to be doing that. But so the key is to have a strong relationship. When you start with someone and get a sense of who he is as a human being, how he looks at short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, the ability to be in a family or a geographical location, how important is starting and winning and the quality of the coach. You really need to get to know someone and ask them leading questions so that you can establish bonding. And hopefully once you've gone through the whole process of helping someone getting drafted and then that first contract, they're already bonded. So that ought to last for their whole career.
Our former president, may he rest in peace, Ronald Reagan, when he got elected to be the president, were you like, I challenged this guy. I battled him at Berkeley University for your rights, because you were actually the president.
Yes.
Of your school as far as, what is it, fighting for rights in schools?
Well, student body president, so you dealt with all student issues, but at that time the campuses were aflame, and every single quarter there was a new confrontation. So Reagan was building his career off of cracking down on the students, and so we had some interesting interactions. Later, ironically, he gave me a presidential commendation, and I visited with him when he came home from the White House. So we laughed about those days, but it wasn't very funny when there were helmeted police with batons and they were throwing tear gas.
But isn't that awesome that you actually battled him in at your school, and then next thing you know, he becomes the president. He was a governor at the time.
He was.
I would brag about that. I would definitely brag about that.
Well, actually, he tried to fire the chancellor of Berkeley. So we went in front of the Board of Regents, and he looks over at me and he says, "Weren't you the same Mr. Steinberg that was sitting in front of troop trains in 1960 and got arrested?" I said, "Well, Governor, I was about 10 then, and I was closer to playing with toy trains than troop trains, but that shows your usual adherence to veracity and fact."
Right.
That got it going pretty well.
Let's talk about Warren Moon. First of all, he had a 17-year career in the NFL, and in the first 5 years, it was in Canada?
6. Yes.
6 years. So his durability, that's unbelievable, hanging in the league that long. But how did you convince the scouts, the GMs, the owners, hey, he is a quarterback. He is not going to play any other position?
Well, as he was going through the whole scouting process, there were teams that wanted to change his position. But he would have been drafted in the 1978 draft as a quarterback. He just didn't want to sit behind someone else. So no team put a draft pick down on him after he had signed in Canada. So he got to sign, he got to start right away. He had been a rollout quarterback. There was a certain amount of prejudice against a black quarterback. But in 6 years in Canada, he broke every record. So in 1984, we timed his contract so he would come back. At the time, you had a USFL, NFL, and CFL, 12 teams all bidding to sign him. And he was the first pure free agent at a quality position to come back at the prime of his career. There was no free agency at that time. So all teams had to do was pay him. They didn't have to give up anything. And so we took a tour all across the country, and owners were offering oil wells and parts of buildings, and he eventually signed with the Houston Oilers for the largest contract in history at that point.
The best moment, and I know, actually you and Warren went to the same high school?
We did, Hamilton,
High School,
not
right
far
here.
from here.
Not far from here, right. And what was it like in Dayton, Ohio, when you see him inducted to the Hall of Fame in the NFL?
Well, I had the honor of giving his presenting speech, so it was a very poignant moment because he had played 23 years. He came and worked with me after his career was over, so we sort of grew up together. And watching him be inducted as the first African-American quarterback to ever, in the modern era, be in the Hall of Fame in front of all those fans was great. And after I gave the speech, he came up to give his, he hugged me, he said, "I love you," and that makes working with athletes worthwhile.
How many owners and GMs say, "Oh man, Steinberg is here, I can't take this. His offers, whatever, because there's an incident with you and Edgerrin James.
Edgerrin,
yes. Edgerrin James, University of Miami kid, running back, stud. You were actually at football camp. Who was it? Was it Brian? Bill Polian was there, and he said, "Get out of my office." He had security escort you and James out of there, and then you flew to San Francisco. And then what happened?
And then I had another lawyer continue to talk to him, and by the time I got back, the deal was done, so I had to get right back on the plane and fly back to Indianapolis. I didn't even leave the airport. In general, I viewed owners as my allies, because together we needed to avoid ugly negotiations that would only push fans away. And we needed to avoid collective bargaining that was going to damage the sport. So I saw them as my allies in building the brand. So I was close friends with many, and we had the star players on most of them. In that particular case, it was worse because Bill Polian has never liked agents. And the thought that someone who doesn't have a football career could say one word about football is abhorrent to him. So Team Edgerrin, which was his brother and a couple lawyers that had interviewed and picked me, wanted to come up and see part of the negotiation. So that's the day they picked. So not only me, but the whole James contingent was unceremoniously marched out of training camp.
Being a sports agent, is it important to also be a great friend? For instance, like with Troy Aikman, you represent Troy at the time. The Dallas Cowboys were 1-15 his rookie year, and he's saying, "Leigh, get me out of here. The team is horrible. I want to get out of here." How did you convince him to say, "Hey, you got to stay"?
Well, people were saying at that point that if Jerry Jones had bought the 7-Eleven, he would change the name to 0-11. And Troy was said that his UCLA senior group of players had more talent than what he was playing with in Dallas. But what I said to him was this: do you think Jerry Jones, who's just paid you the record-breaking contract, has a healthy desire to win? And he said, yes. And I said, and do you think Jimmy Johnson does? And he said, yes. And I said, so think of it like a computer that's a very highly efficient machine, but they don't have enough input yet. They don't have the players yet. But you love country music, you love riding horses, you grew up half of your life in Henrietta, Oklahoma. Isn't Dallas the most amazing city for you? And if you turn it around, won't it be a place you want to be? And then very quickly, they drafted Emmitt Smith. The players he was drafted with, like Gerald Johnson, kicked in. They already had Michael Irvin, and they started to roll.
How often, as a sports agent, do you travel? I mean, when do you make time for your family?
So when I got married later in life, and I was traveling quite a bit during the season, all the time to see games, during negotiations, flying from city to city. I had to learn how to work more efficiently, work smarter. What were the things that I could have someone else do, and what was I irreplaceable for? So that's how I made time, because representing athletes is wonderful, but having children, they don't ask to be born. We sort of bring them on the planet. So I owed them that focus, and so I didn't miss virtually any soccer games, and I tried to be there for them.
Now, speaking of family, your grandfather was like Mr. Hollywood. He was managing the Hillcrest Country Club.
Right.
Did you actually remember sitting on Marilyn Monroe's lap?
I did.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, probably 6.
Wow.
And every day he had lunch at the comedian's table, which was Groucho Marx, George Burns, George Jessel, Danny Kaye. George Burns took me to my first baseball game. And so I used to listen to all these funny old Jewish comedians telling jokes. It was pretty funny, but I didn't realize till later, but Elvis Presley gave me an autographed guitar, and I sat on Marilyn Monroe's lap. I was just a kid. I had no context for it.
Now, in the movie Jerry Maguire, the stories were inspired by you. My question to you is, Cameron Crowe, did he let you direct? When you were on set, was there time, hey, Tom Cruise, you did it wrong. Your body language was wrong, something was wrong. No, you have to do it again.
If a director allowed me to direct, he wouldn't be a director.
Okay.
So,
but he has to play the authenticity of
so what happened is, in 1993, he called me and said he wanted to do a film based on a sports agent. Could he follow me and shadow me and be involved in would I introduce him to people? So he went back to New York for the draft where Drew Bledsoe was the first pick. He flew up when we had a press conference with Bill Parcells. He came to the league meetings with all the different teams there. I introduced him to people, and he was a fly on the wall listening. He came to a series of games, to Super Bowl, to Pro Scouting Day at SC, and I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. And then when he wrote the script, I had to vet it to make sure that the willing suspension of disbelief that's necessary to keep you in a movie, it's not a spoof, you know it's not phony, wasn't broken. And then actually I took Cuba Gooding Jr. down to the Super Bowl in Phoenix, and I made him pretend to be a wide receiver for a whole week. And I said, you know, this role might take you somewhere. And he won Best Supporting Oscar.
In the movie Any Given Sunday, you actually were a film consultant, the film directed by Oliver Stone. You and Al Pacino had a conversation. What was that all about?
I was helping to put him in role as to what a coach might be like, how he would deal with players, and what the pressure would be on him to win. And we talked about some of his movies. Now, actually, he was a big boxing fan. He didn't know that much about football. I remember one scene he did in the locker room. He was standing against the wall, totally into himself, looked like he wasn't even there, and then he came out and did a brilliant thing. So
that monologue at the end?
Yes.
Oh, man, yeah, that was motivating. By 1999, you had 86 clients. What made you decide to sell your agency?
So it was an age of consolidation, and what was happening at that point was that bigger corporations were buying up a variety of sports agencies. What they wanted was to get the marketing, the power to market teams and leagues and universities and corporations. And then they wanted the content supply. They wanted to be able to do a sports-themed reality show or a competition show or a sports-themed motion picture or apps that could be used to bring fans closer. They wanted that ownership. So the concept was to synergize all of that together, and that's what we set out to do.
Do you regret that decision?
I do. Autonomy is such a critically important thing. To be able to make every decision with other people, but for what you think is the best interest. And to lose that, I lost something precious. And they decided to go public, and it ended up sort of a mess. And we already were doing fine financially. So, but I had a partner, Jeff Morad, who wanted to buy a baseball team. And so he wanted to aggregate a ton of money. So there I was left with a pile of money and not very happy.
How much did you sell the agency for?
$120 million.
120 million. I know you were very close to your father, may he rest in peace, and he gave you a warning not to sell it. Did he tell you, hey, you don't want to do this? Because I know he was like your biggest role model, best friend.
He was. A whole lot of people told me that. I remember Bob Kraft telling me, don't sell your firm. And my wife didn't want me to sell. I didn't want to sell. So I rejected the first few offers, but my partner was invaluable. We had a 20-year partnership that was wonderful. So the critical key at that point was, did I want to lose my partner or and go on by myself? And I didn't. And I thought it might be exciting to go buy a series of firms, and we bought 3, but it didn't turn out very well.
Now, Leigh, you lived a life. You had money, power, fame, pictures of you in front cover magazines. What led to you to hit that bottom?
Well, first of all, there's no excuse ever for succumbing to alcoholism. So none of what I'm going to say is an excuse. I should have had the strength to deal with problems in a better way. There were a series of events in my own life. My father died a long death from cancer. My 2 kids were diagnosed with incurable eye disease. We lost a house to mold. So I felt powerless, as if I didn't have the power to protect my children, put a roof over our head, couldn't help my father, and then my marriage broke up. And for the first time I was alone in an apartment, and I found out it was legal to consume alcohol while it was light outside, which was a revelation to me because I'd never done that. And so I spiraled down the next few years, and then in 2010 finally went into sober living and said, if nothing else, I will be a good father and I'll be sober. And so I spent some years rebuilding and making amends and dealing with financial situations, and so I'm now halfway through my 5th year of sobriety, and I was helped by a unique fellowship and worked a 12-step program, and every day is a blessing.
There was also a moment when you were, I think it was your parents' house, and you were drinking during the day, vodka, and then finally a thought came to your head, a very powerful thought, like, you know what, is this what I want to do? Well, I mean, tell me about that thought.
See, my father had 2 core values. One was to treasure relationships, especially family. And the second was to try to make a meaningful difference in the world and to help people who couldn't help themselves. And I had an epiphany, a brief moment of clarity where I said, I'm failing all of that. And then it was a sense of proportionality. Here I was sitting on my deceased father's bed with a big jug of vodka, and my best thought was to keep drinking. And I thought, you know, I'm not a starving peasant in Darfur. I'm not named Steinberg in Nazi Germany in the late 30s. And I don't have cancer. I don't have a crippling ailment. What excuse do I have to sit here and wallow? And so my brother took me to sober living, and here we are 5 years later.
How awesome is the feeling that you're clean now the past 5 years?
It's, for those of us who have struggled with addiction, sobriety comes first. Mm-hmm. It's first. Without sobriety, nothing else functions. So I, again, look at every day as a blessing. I have a second chance to do meaningful things and make a difference in the world. And
has people ever come up to you, the people that were in the program, like, hey Leigh, you're so inspiring, thank you so much, I learned a lot from you, you're my role model?
So I had to make a decision about how public to be. Now some of it, because a lot of the saga was covered in newspapers, maybe it wasn't that brave a decision, but what happened was I just decided to post a number of days on my Facebook to talk about it openly, to write a book about it, in the hope that someone out there who's confused, desperate, thinks there's no hope, can realize that there is hope and there is help. So I think the key is to feel like, perhaps in some little way, my experience can help other people, and that's the key. We all get help from other people. We're all modeling ourselves after other people.
And the biggest question right now, what are you doing now? That's what the show's all about, your journey. Now what are you doing now? I'm
hanging out in this funky barbershop in Beverly Hills, sort of, you know, cruising along. We're getting ready to, I've been refunded, we're getting ready to recruit a new crop of footballers for the 2015 draft, and then move on to baseball, basketball, and a number of other sports. So we're just in the first 9 months of gestation in this project. I'm writing for Forbes.com and a number of sites. I do a radio show every week. I speak, and we're very involved in trying to bring awareness on the concussion issue, to try to find some new way of helmetry, to try to find a way to cure the brain ultimately. And again, I have an environmental initiative called the Sporting Green Alliance, where we take sustainable technology in wind, solar, recycling, resurfacing, and water to, as a package, to reduce carbon emissions and energy costs at stadium, arena, and practice fields at the high school, collegiate, and professional level. So it's using sports. If the problem is bullying, high school athletes can lead the charge against bullying instead of being the bulliers. If it's domestic violence, Lennox Lewis cut a public service announcement that said, real men don't hit women. And that could do more to change behavioral tendencies in young adolescents than 1,000 people. So I've always asked the athletes to go back to their high school, collegiate, and professional community and set up programs that will enhance the quality of life, because I think that's what gets them moving to a successful worldview and second career. So 3 of the players that I work with are now minority owners of teams, and many of them have been greatly successful.
Now, Leigh, is it hard to get a kid now to represent, because people say, well, look at his history. You want a guy like that to represent you? I mean, is it harder right now?
You know, in the field of sports, alcohol is the #1 drug of choice. And many of us have experienced problems. And fortunately, some of the athletes and their families are pretty forgiving. Had I remained on my father's bed, yes. But we'll see. All I can do is be honest. And I can guarantee one thing: they will have the only certified, regulated, sober agent in the country.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So I think I've learned from those life experiences, and I hope that it's given me an enhanced appreciation of some of the areas that are dangerous, not just for myself, but for athletes.
What advice would you tell an inspiring sports agent? Because it is a tough business. I mean, you know, the lifestyle and everything. How can that kid coming out of law school say, hey, I want to be a sports agent? What would you tell him?
It's funny, I was having a conversation with my friend James, and I told him that 90% of the people who enter the field quickly go out of business.
Right.
For the young person, study psychology. If you can understand what it is that motivates human beings and makes them act the way they do, it will be a benefit in everything you do. And then study business. And then try to get an internship somewhere. And when you're trying to get that internship, make sure that you do something unique as opposed to just sending a piece of paper with a bunch of type on it. So we had a young lawyer put together a Sports Illustrated some years back that was a mock Sports Illustrated, but every article was about how we had flourished after I hired him. And it was brilliant, brilliantly done. And I could see in that presentation what skill set he had. So do something like that, and then do this if it's your passion. If you don't think of this as a job, but sort of a way of life. And then have enough idealism that you want to really help athletes and make it, and be a steward of the sport.
Now, Leigh, we're going to conclude this. If there was a biography about Leigh Steinberg, which actor would you want to play you? If it was your journey, right from the beginning, from childhood to Berkeley, law school, the whole 9.
Well, Jerry Lewis got a lot older.
Okay.
So, who would I like? Denzel Washington.
All right. Play Leigh Steinberg, right? All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, and so happy you're here. Seriously, coming from Newport, I know it's a trip, And also, I met you at the ESPYs. I recognized you right away. I was like, I got to get this guy on my show.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's an honor.